You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hello, welcome to episode 280 of the podcast. Adrian here, and Renaud joins me this time. Hi, Renaud.
Hello.
Hi there. Today, Renaud, rare earths. This has been in the news recently, and there's been some press about the rare earth supply coming from China. So we're going to talk a little bit about this news and why it's important, and why, if you're in the electronics or electromechanical game, this could be an issue for you.
Right. Well, timely topic, let's say, right? I think this is connected to the whole episodes about the trade war and Trump and his Liberation Day and the tariffs and so on and so forth. Because this seems to be, let's say, coming from the same general context of international affairs, right?
Yeah, you're right. So when the Trump administration put all of the tariffs on China, China did hit back with its own retaliatory tariffs and some other measures. And one of these, I believe, was that they said they were going to withhold the export of certain rare earth magnets, especially those that are used for, well, many electronic and electromechanical products and for military use. So we're talking military fighter jets, missile systems, things like that. Obviously, countries like the US do not want to have problems with that particular supply chain, and China would have known this. That's why they put these restrictions in place. Now, recently, earlier on in June 2025, China and the US met in London for trade talks, and I think one of the export restrictions they discussed loosening was getting more access to rare earth magnets back into the US. And don't forget that the US don't like to allow exports of the most advanced AI chips to China. So China's point of view is, well, you block us from some of the materials or components that we need, and we know we can block you. Let's talk a little bit about rare earth magnets for a moment, though, because you might be thinking, hang on a minute, what are rare earth magnets? Well, in particular, I think a very important one is called neodymium. So NdFeB magnets, neodymium iron boron, are some of the strongest magnets that can be made. They're very commonly used in all sorts of today's important products: EVs, wind turbines, headphone speakers, mics, hard disk drives, robots, obviously military uses. So, I mean, these are really ubiquitous. And I think the important thing to know here is that in terms of production, and again, I've got a Reuters article here, my understanding is that China has 99% of refined production, or maybe at least over 90%, which is almost a complete monopoly. And so for something that's so important, you have to buy this from China.
Oh, yeah. Or at least China is in your supply chain, right? And this comes from the, how to say, the deep need of China, the Chinese leadership for independence, right? We don't want somebody else to be able to get us in trouble. And so we're going to be self-sufficient. And in the 2010s, they put a lot of emphasis on some core technologies, and Made in China 2025, obviously, also pushed in that direction. But they saw that there's a certain number of minerals that are absolutely essential for making, any smart products, let's say. Like, some of them go into batteries, some of them are used in some electromechanical, let's say, modules, or even some sensors and things like that. Well, that's, the case for magnets and for some other important applications in smart products. Well, China did not want to, how to say, develop cutting edge industries. And remember, Made in China 2025 was about the train, the plane, the electric vehicles, and so on. A lot of advanced electronic product, let's say. And yeah, they didn't want to do that and have these industries still rely on imports. So China has large reserves of a lot of these minerals. For some of the minerals, they need to import, all right. But then at least the processing of the minerals basically has to be done in China, more than 90% of the time these days, simply because China invested and made it cheaper, and nobody really saw that as a national security concern. So okay, let's just buy from the lowest bidder, and China just crushed all the competition and basically owns that industry of processing / refining these minerals that are on the list of highly important materials that go into the strategic technologies, right? That China has been developing. So that here we are in 2025. Seems the plan has worked. China is self-sufficient and also is the dominant player by far, and export either very often components and modules and full products made from these minerals. And sometimes they just export the minerals, but very often they do more than processing the minerals and refining them, etc. They do some of the other manufacturing steps in many cases. So
Absolutely.
That's their position of strength, right? That's where their plan really, really worked. Not just there, right? Look at trains, and obviously their plan worked in more than one area. At the same time, and that's kind of the other side, right? Basically, what you're saying is China is restricting the export of some of these minerals, like specifically the one to make a lot of the magnets.
Yep.
Why are they keeping that in their pockets? What do they want the US to stop doing here?
Well, the US originally put up tariffs, as we know well, to triple-digit numbers, and I think they had the trade talks in London fairly recently to try to get those down. And I think the current tariff on many Chinese products, if not all, is 55%. I believe I'm correct in saying.
Not all. It's
okay.
Yeah, it goes from like 0% on some educational products for kids, etc. But that's very few products.
Yeah.
A lot of the products that we work on are around 54, 55%. Yeah, that range. Some of them are a bit lower if it's kind of those that are, let's say, the kind of products that Apple would buy. Okay, a little bit lower, and some others are higher. Right, it's a whole range. But there's something else, right? That China is not happy about, and that China is trying to push the US to lift. There's also an export ban on certain things that China really, really wants. Is the advanced semiconductors and GPU style chips, right?
Yes.
The most powerful NVIDIA chips for typically is the ones that we think about, like the GB200 and things like that. And they have export control over that. It cannot be sold to China and a few other countries, I guess. And it's kind of constraining China's ability to train a lot of their models. Now, they're doing a lot of things to go around that. There were reports last week in the Wall Street Journal of people who went to big data centers in Malaysia with suitcases full of hard drive disks, Okay,
Mm.
here's all the data, and let's do all the training in a very well equipped data center. And then once all the training is done, okay, then we got our model that's finely tuned and we can use it, right? So there are certainly limits to that, but I think it runs deeper. I think Chinese leadership has been quite frustrated by the lack of progress of their leading edge semiconductor industry, right? And I think we really need to look at it in that context. The number one Chinese semiconductor manufacturer called SMIC is way behind the leading edge manufacturers, TSMC in Taiwan, Samsung
Mm.
in Korea, even it seems Intel, which is not exactly in the driver's seat, let's say, anymore in the industry, right? But there's a lot of export controls, right? They cannot buy the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines from
Mm-hmm.
ASML. They cannot buy a number of things. A lot of actually, pretty much all of the software to design chips is American. I mean, there's a lot of things that basically tend to keep the Chinese semiconductor industry back a bit. And I think that's really the context, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so you want to keep us back, in like on this core technology, absolutely core technology. You also put a lot of tariffs on what we sell to you, like, don't expect me to be very nice to you, right?
Mm.
Oh, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler and the others. Oh, they need magnets. Oh, and well, you also need magnets for whatever your F-15 jets and
Yep.
F-35, so on. You need jets for, magnets for all kinds of products. Well, you know, we get you, right? It's
Yes.
You guys are not self-sufficient. Let me show you. Like, we're all interdependent. You don't want to talk.
Mm.
You're gonna come to the table. You're gonna want to talk, right?
Yep.
I think that's the context. Whereas
Mm.
the Trump administration came and didn't really want to talk with the Chinese authorities, and they just slapped tariffs, and they're like, don't really want to talk. They wanted to do their bluff. They thought they were playing
Mm.
poker. Well, it's not that simple. It's not that simple
Right.
with
No.
another big superpower, that got a lot of aces up their sleeves, basically. So I think that's the context, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good read on it, right? And so my understanding is that by May 2025, China's overseas shipments of the rare earth magnets that we've been talking about
Mm.
actually dropped by over 50%. So clearly they were serious about not exporting this
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
and probably largely to the States, let's be honest, right? But I think at the moment, after those trade talks, although China have tied exports of these rare earth materials to actually being able to obtain, let's call them, the most sophisticated chips that would be used for AI or things like that, I don't think the US have agreed to it. And I think that there's only a temporary allowance by China to export some of the rare earth products, right? So my understanding is there's about a 6-month window where they will allow exports. And then after that, who knows? And this has actually led to some instability in supply chains and in the market, because any of the export licenses that have been recently issued by China are only valid for about 6 months.
Mm.
So even some of the big automakers, like there was another article about Tata Motors in India, and
Mm.
they produce a lot of EVs. And I'm assuming that EVs use more rare earth magnets than normal gas cars because they're less mechanical, I
Oh,
guess. So they've said if this carries on, we're first going to be looking at alternative materials completely and components completely, and ultimately trying to get rid of rare earth magnets completely from our products because they don't want to be reliant on the whims of China if China are going to keep starting and stopping exports. I mean, you can imagine for automakers, this is a particularly big problem because they really suffer from supply chain instability. So, what I mean to say here is that although we're not going to compare ourselves to Tata in terms of size, probably most of the listeners, your business will be smaller, and that's fine. But this isn't the first time, Renaud, that we've heard about supply chain instability coming from China, right? And so I guess the lessons learnt here are that we need to consider if we are trying to source these very, very critical materials, what do we do if our supply chain is not stable?
Hmm. Well, there's several things you can do, right? Some companies definitely are going to try to stock up. However, China, of course, is is going to try to find ways to, to say, well, your historical consumption has been this much, and now you want to go 2x, 3x, 5x. Like that doesn't really make sense. We can export to you something that's in line with what you've been buying, but we see what you're trying to do here, right? They don't want to lose their leverage. They really want the other side to come back to the table to negotiate, within the next 6 months and really want to make a deal. So they don't want people to buy 2 years worth of magnets in advance. Okay. The other thing that some companies are probably going to do is they're going to say, you know what? Can't buy the minerals to make the magnets, but maybe let's just buy the whole electric motors from China instead of trying to make them in whatever, in the USA or in Germany or something. Because China will happily sell that to us, right?
Mm.
So what that does is reinforce the reliance on these other countries on China-made products, right? And that really plays well for Beijing. I mean, obviously, they would be very happy to see that happen. I'm sure some
Mhm.
companies are planning to do that or have already started. What are we doing? Why are we trying to make this here? We rely on a foreign source for a critical component, and it's high risk. We're not sure we still have some in 6 months, like that doesn't make sense. Let's just find a good manufacturer of the whole sub-assembly, and that's it, just gonna buy that from China. So transfer a lot of
Mm.
the value added back to China. What else can you do? Can you re-engineer your main products so that they use less magnets or other types of magnets? In some cases, it may make sense, especially if there's other benefits to it. Maybe much cheaper, maybe, I don't know, so some other benefits. But
Yeah.
going into product redesign for that, well, first, it might take more than 6 months actually to get all this ready for production. And second, companies only have, let's say, a certain bandwidth to do a certain number of things.
Mm.
There's one more heavy project right here, and it's redesign and development and industrialization, maybe different technology. Like, what's the likelihood that it's actually going to really be ready and in production and as good as the current product? We don't really know, right? So some guys might be doing some R&D and some testing and so on to explore, but are they going to say, okay, that's it, we're just going to do that, that's the solution, and we'll be okay? Not so often, I bet, right? And what other solutions do you have?
Well, I think in due course there will be more supply coming out of other countries other than China.
Right.
For example, I know that they have large deposits in Australia and that there are certain Australian mining companies who are setting up a lot of refining
Oh, yeah.
operations, and that's going to be offered. So there's kind of like this collective of Western countries who are trying to get together to build up
Oh, yeah.
Western ability to produce this stuff because of this almost monopoly by China. But I mean, when China's sitting on 90 odd percent of refining capability and on basically 50% of the global reserves of all of the rare earths, that this isn't something that can be done overnight. I
No,
think,
no, it's gonna
I
take
think I
time.
heard
Mm.
I think I heard that Deng Xiaoping in the 80s, maybe, or maybe in the 70s, he actually said, and I don't know, don't quote me on this, but I believe his quote was that the Saudis have oil and China has rare earths. So that shows
Mm.
how confident he was that this would become a key sort of material or product for China.
All right. Well, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, certainly there's investments going into that, but some of the output will go primarily, not primarily, but let's say in priority to the military and some
Oh, yeah.
other related industries. Then is going to go to big companies that are going to make and when it comes to the small and medium companies, they're not going to see the color of it. It's
No.
that's what I'm afraid of. So, what do you do if you are not General Motors, right? Tough, tough one, I guess.
Mm.
Tough one. There's not so many things you can do.
Do you do you potentially try to purchase the components, so the sub-assemblies and components from a supplier who's not even in China? Let's assume that they're made in China using Chinese rare earth materials, but maybe you buy them from Vietnam or Malaysia or somewhere like that.
Maybe, but again, China is going to control who they sell it to, so it's not going to
Mm,
be that easy, I guess.
mm,
And yeah, I'm just afraid. Oh, we just want to buy that magnet like this in large quantity. Oh no, sorry. Like,
yeah.
you know, no stock and we're already full for the next 9 months and not sure we can keep some for you, right? These kind of issues. Kind of like the some of the electronic component shortages that we saw around the COVID time,
Yes.
where there was limited supply and then you had companies buying some and stocking up and waiting for the prices to go higher and then selling them little by little. It was so messy.
Yep.
Uh, I'm afraid we'll see some of that also here.
Well, this is a very similar situation actually, and
Mm.
I would
Oh, yeah.
throw this out to the listeners. If you need to get hold of these kinds of rare earth magnets or other rare earth material products for your products, what have you seen? Have you had any issues with getting hold of it? I mean, this is not connected to COVID and a pandemic, but COVID kind of caused these kinds of supply chain disruptions. And this has also been caused by an external thing happening, and that's the trade war that's heated up between China and the US. And that's what's caused this, because it's a form of retaliatory gesture from China. So where we are right now, I guess, is that you really got to keep an eye on what's going on between the US and China to see if they're able to come to an agreement where they can relax the restrictions. As I said, my understanding is there's, a handful of months now where exports will be allowed, perhaps not for military use, if my reading's correct. But beyond that, do they pull the plug again completely, the Chinese, and then you can't get hold of these products? It's possible.
Mm. No idea. I mean, you
Mm.
wanted to look into the crystal ball?
That's it. No, we've got to keep an eye on it. And
Yeah.
and when we do know more, we'll cover it again. But I mean, this struck me as a story that perhaps hasn't been covered enough because these particular products and components are so ubiquitous. They're so important for so many kinds of products. Yet we haven't heard enough about it as sort of like headline news. But I don't know if people out there are really already, they've suffered from not being able to get hold of these. They sure will if exports are stopped.
Yeah, right. Well, the
Mm.
big companies, especially the big electric vehicle manufacturers in the US and other countries, have been voicing, their concern here for sure.
Yep.
And again, this, China is not done. They do that, and then they say, well, you want electric vehicles? We make a lot of them. We make way too many of them. We'll be happy to
Yeah.
export them to you.
Yeah. Ours are better than yours.
Yeah. And they say, well, let's do, we're going to do your tariffs and then blah, blah, blah. And you want to have a deal within 2 months, etc. Okay. Well, we give you a window where you will issue some export licenses, but for next 6 months, then we'll see. Like, if you behave nicely, we'll extend. And if not, too bad for you.
Yep.
That's the message. That's the message.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's keep an eye on it. Interesting story. I think it's worth keeping an eye on for anyone who needs these kinds of components and products, which is a lot of people. And when we do know more, we'll cover it again. But yeah, a timely story, Renaud. So thanks for going through that with me.
Thanks.
And for the various articles and videos that we've had a look at before this, I'll leave links to those in the show notes. If you've got any questions as well, please do get in touch with us. Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.